But first, some of the news that we've been covering at the Electronic Intifada. On Monday morning, the Israeli army withdrew after 2 continuous weeks of attacking, besieging, and destroying the entire Al-Shifa medical complex in Gaza City. During its siege on Al-Shifa Hospital, the largest medical facility in the Gaza Strip, Israel destroyed, quote, all buildings and apartments without exception in a clear crime that shames humanity, according to the Gaza government media office. The army faced fierce battles from Palestinian resistance factions, some of which we'll get into with John later on in the program. When the families of patients, medical staff, and displaced persons who were trapped inside the hospital and its grounds during Israel's raid and massacres returned to retrieve their loved ones, many found bodies in fragments, flattened under bulldozer treads. Children's corpses were discovered burned beyond recognition. The Gaza government media office added that, quote, inside the complex and its surroundings, the occupation army killed more than 400 martyrs and attempted to hide its abominable crime by executing hundreds of civilians, the wounded and the sick within the walls of the Al-Shifa medical complex. They covered the bodies with piles of sand, bulldozed them, buried them, and mixed them with the ground of the complex. Moreover, more than 300 prisoners were arrested, while over 100 Palestinian civilians are still missing as a result of the occupation's shocking crime. Hundreds of bodies inside Al-Shifa complex and in the surrounding area were found burned and mutilated, including corpses, quote, with their heads and limbs severed, stated the Geneva-based Euro-Mediterranean Human Rights Monitor. The group called Israel's destruction and slaughter at Al-Shifa one of the largest massacres in Palestinian history. Physicians were executed, and more than 20 patients were found dead in their hospital beds, quote, as a result of the Israeli siege of the complex and the deliberate deprivation by Israeli soldiers of medical care, food, and water, Euromed stated on Monday. Israeli lawmakers and political figures have repeated claims that the hospital complex was used as a Hamas and Islamic Jihad command center. Naftali Bennett, Israel's former prime minister, called the destruction of Al-Shifa a quote, amazing battlefield achievement. Hamas used staff and patients as human shields in order to cause maximum civilian casualties as to create more criticism and pressure on Israel, Bennett claimed, adding that, quote, not one civilian was killed, not one. Israel's military chief of staff, Herzl Halevi, boasted on Saturday that the army's siege of Al-Shifa sends, quote, a very, very important message here. A hospital is not a safe place. Physicians from Al-Shifa held a press conference on Monday on the ruins of the hospital grounds. Here's the head of the nursing department, Dr. Jadala Sahafi, speaking to Al Jazeera.
With deep regret, we have come to see this shocking scene at Al-Shifa medical complex. The scale of deliberate destruction and willful annihilation of the facilities and the infrastructure by the Israelis are beyond description. What we have witnessed is nothing compared to what we have seen. It is a deliberate act against Gaza's symbol, Al-Shifa Medical Complex, the largest in the Gaza Strip, catering to more than 2,000 patients and performing more than 100 surgical operations in a single day. It is now a total wreck. The Israelis are purposefully ruining Gaza's entire health sector. Patients and medical staff were besieged for more than 15 days without the basic necessities for life, let alone medical supplies. Dead bodies decomposed, reeking and bloated. There were worms crawling out of them. In addition to the forcible expulsion of patients and displaced civilians sheltering within the compound. It is a full-fledged war crime by the Israelis. About 30 medical staff are not accounted for, and we do not know what has become of them. Were they executed or detained? We call on the International Red Cross and all international organizations to help us locate their whereabouts.
That was Dr. Jadala Sahafi, the head of Al-Shifa Hospital's nursing department, speaking to Al Jazeera on Monday. Doa Shaheen, writing in the Electronic Intifada, reported that a man named Salim Baraka saw, quote, the kind of horror no parent should ever have to endure. The Israeli military killed his son Karim right in front of him. Shaheen writes, quote, like so many others, Salim and Karim fled from their home in Jabalia refugee camp, northern Gaza, during the current genocidal war. They took shelter at Al-Shifa, Gaza's largest hospital. They were inside the hospital when it was stormed by Israeli forces on March 18th. Salim recalled how he spent the following week, quote, waiting to die. Quote, quadcopter drones were firing wildly, striking anything that moved, he said. The Israelis smashed the glass in the windows and destroyed the walls in the department where we were hiding. A shell fell on us and killed my son in front of my eyes, he added. I could not save him. He bled to death. The situation, in Salim's words, was, quote, worse than hell. For much more, read Doa Shaheen's feature, Siege of Gaza's Largest Hospital, Worse Than Hell, and my post, Al-Shifa Hospital in Ruins, on electronicintifada.net. The day before it withdrew from Al-Shifa, the Israeli army bombed tents housing displaced persons and journalists in the courtyard of the Al-Aqsa Hospital in Deir Balah in central Gaza. At least 4 people were killed and 17 others were wounded in the Israeli airstrike. Hind Khudari, who has contributed to the Electronic Intifada and works as a reporter for Al Jazeera, was inside one of the tents for working journalists. She told the network that, quote, everyone is terrified here. They have been seeking refuge inside this hospital for more than 6 months now, she said. Last week, the Switzerland-based Insecurity Insight Research Institution reported that there have now been more than 1,000 recorded attacks on healthcare in the occupied West Bank and Gaza Strip since October 7th. 785 attacks on healthcare facilities were reported over the last 6 months of Israel's genocide in Gaza, the group stated, while 175 attacks were on facilities in the West Bank. Most of these attacks involved airstrikes, damaging or destroying hospitals and clinics, and killing health workers. Insecurity Insight stated that the Israeli army's, quote, unrelenting aerial attack on the Strip has had a catastrophic and far-reaching impact on the population and the healthcare system. Over the weekend, the International Court of Justice issued new provisional measures stating that Israel must take all necessary and effective measures to ensure, without delay and in full cooperation with the United Nations, the unhindered provision at scale by all concerned of urgently needed basic services and humanitarian assistance to Palestinians throughout the Gaza Strip. Euromed Human Rights Monitor stated that, quote, the fresh ICJ order observes that Palestinians in Gaza are no longer facing only the risk of famine, but that famine is setting in, and that the pre-January catastrophic humanitarian situation in the Strip has further deteriorated. The court says that its earlier orders, which it issued on January 26th, did not fully address the consequences arising from the changes in the situation in Gaza. According to the ICJ's new order, Israel must ensure the unhindered provision at scale of basic services and humanitarian assistance, including food, water, fuel, shelter, clothing, hygiene, and sanitation requirements, and medical supplies, plus increase the capacity and number of land crossing points and keep them open for as long as necessary, Euromed Human Rights Monitor said. However, Israel's engineered starvation of Palestinians in Gaza remains in full swing, and the army has not stopped targeting people awaiting aid, it has not stopped blocking the aid, and it has not stopped targeting aid workers. Overnight on Tuesday, as Tamara Nassar reported, the Israeli Air Force struck a convoy of aid workers in Deir Balah, central Gaza, killing 7 members of the US-based World Central Kitchen charity. An Israeli Elbit Hermes 450 drone, quote, fired 3 missiles one after the other, according to the Tel Aviv newspaper Haaretz, from unnamed defense sources privy to the details of the attack. The aid team, quote, was traveling in a deconflicted zone in 2 armored cars branded with the World Central Kitchen logo and a soft-skin vehicle, World Central Kitchen said. Graphic images depicting the corpses of aid workers clad in bulletproof vests bearing the logo of World Central Kitchen circulated on social media, Tamara writes. She adds that the World Central Kitchen announced the immediate suspension of all of its operations in the region. Ships that had already set sail from Cyprus as part of the charity's operations were reportedly turning back. UNRWA, a U.S. charity providing humanitarian aid to Palestinians, also announced a pause in its operations in Gaza. It was the second largest humanitarian aid group in the Gaza Strip after the UN Agency for Palestine Refugees, or UNRWA. UNRWA said that, quote, the unprecedented scale of the current conflict and the disregard for international law necessitate this historic pause in our operations. The Gaza Logistics and Support Coordinator for the group, Musa Shawa, was also killed in an Israeli strike on Deir al-Balah last month. Israel's military chief of staff, 𝐓𝐡𝐞 𝐄𝐥𝐞 said that, quote, the strike on World Central Kitchen was not carried out with the intention of harming aid workers. He added, it was a mistake that followed a misidentification at night during a war in very complex conditions. It shouldn't have happened. John Kirby, the U.S. State Department spokesperson, said, quote, there's no evidence that the Israeli army killing of World Central Kitchen staff was deliberate.
Presumes at this very early hour that it was a deliberate strike, that they knew exactly what they were hitting, that they were hitting aid workers and did it on purpose, and there's no evidence of that. I would also remind you, sir, that we continue to look at incidents as they occur. The State Department has a process in place, and to date, as you and I are speaking, they have not found any incidents where the Israelis have violated international humanitarian law. And lest you think we don't take it seriously, I can assure you that we do. We look at this in real time.
They have never violated international humanitarian law ever in the past 5 to 6 months.
I'm telling you, the State Department has looked at incidents in the past and has yet to determine that any of those incidents violate international humanitarian law. Okay, go ahead.
That was John Kirby of the U.S. State Department. In her report, Tamara Nassar explains that, quote, Israel's genocide in the Gaza Strip over the last 6 months has been marred by attempts to whitewash the man-made catastrophe with humanitarian gestures. The latest face of this effort has been the World Central Kitchen, which describes itself as, quote, first to the front lines, providing meals in response to humanitarian, climate, and community crises. The only reason the World Central Kitchen has been able to deliver aid into Gaza by boat is because the genocidaires of Gaza have given them the green light and safe passage to do so, Tamara notes. The New York Times reported that, quote, every step was carried out with permission from the Israeli military when it spoke to the charity's director of emergency response. Tamara writes that, quote, there remains no technical reason why aid trucks should not be able to enter Gaza by land. It is the most efficient, cost-effective, and safe method of delivering aid to Gaza, and aid trucks remain stuck at the Rafah crossing, with Egypt unable to enter Gaza because Israel won't let them in. Washington refuses to use any of its enormous leverage to compel Tel Aviv to do so, or to end the siege on Gaza altogether. The construction of a temporary pier and the dropping of aid packages from the sky are political gestures aimed at maneuvering and establishing political realities on the ground. For much more on this story, read my colleague Tamara Nassar's latest report, Aid to Gaza, Suspended After Israel Murders World Central Kitchen Workers, on electronicintifada.net. And we'll also be discussing the World Central Kitchen story later on in this program. And finally, the Biden administration is urging members of Congress to approve the sale of up to 50 F-15 fighter jets to the Israeli military in a deal worth more than $18 billion. CNN reported that the arms deal, quote, which would amount to the largest U.S. foreign military sale to Israel since October 7th, comes as the administration is also expected to notify Congress soon of a large new sale of precision-guided munition kits to Israel, according to CNN's sources. And that's just some of the news from on the ground in Palestine over the last few days. Please go to electronicintifada.net to read some of our crucial new features by writers in Gaza, now up on our homepage.
Thanks for watching this video. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel, hit like, leave a comment. These engagements help us with the YouTube algorithm, and it helps us to get around Silicon Valley censorship as much as possible. It does make a difference. You can also support our journalism by going to electronicintifada.net and clicking on Donate Now. Thank you.